Hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're diving back into our series dedicated to Chinese comfort food classics with a shot at a dish that, if I'm being absolutely honest, I sort of made by mistake, which is a crispy pork chow mein. Now, let me explain. I have been making and eating chow mein for the majority of my life now, so a few months ago when I stumbled across a Shanghai chow mein that I genuinely had never heard of before, I was pretty intrigued. It is essentially a pretty straightforward pork and bok choy chow mein with one unique addition, which is the incorporation of thick, round noodles in lieu of the more traditional lo mein. Commonly, you may see these thick Shanghai noodles referred to as udon, and although they are technically different, the more readily available Japanese udon is a very common substitute in this dish. Today, as you may have noticed, I bought the wrong noodles. These are just normal fresh lo mein egg noodles, along with pretty much everything else that we need to make an extremely tasty chow mein. Not to fear, y'all, let's just get a little creative. So, for today's chow mein, we'll be focusing on slicing these center-cut pork loin into long, thin strips, then coating in cornstarch in the style of a Mongolian beef to create the crispiest wok sear to our pork that you will ever witness. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so up first, we're kicking things off here with our aromatic veggies. This is 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic to start, followed by 1 inch or about 1 tablespoon of fine minced ginger set aside for our wok fry later on. Then moving on to our bok choy next. This is some baby bok choy that I'm slicing into spears. The longer and thinner shape to the slice in this bok choy is going to lend itself well to flash frying in the wok later on. I'm doing this by carefully slicing through the root end of the bok choy, sort of how we would slice through a Brussels sprout. This is going to help hold the bok choy together in the fry. If you slice around the core instead, it will sort of just fall apart into leaves. Next up, moving on to the main event, I have about a pound of center-cut pork loin here. I'm starting off by trimming these fat caps off, which, though immensely useful for stir-frying, is ultimately going to cause issues as we slice these up. Nobody likes to bite into a whole piece of fat cap, right? Right? Anyway, once these are trimmed, I'm starting by first butterflying these open to create a thinner piece of pork, then cutting these on a very dramatic bias to create these nice long thin strips of pork. If you've done this correctly, you should be left with the thin strips of pork that you'll recognize from, I don't know, every Chinese stir fry ever, I guess. Diving into our marinade here, I'm leaning heavily into our sugars, partially because it's an iconic element to the Shanghai chow mein, which we're not making, but also because these sugars are going to caramelize in the sear really nicely, creating an even crispier quality to our pork. So, up first, this is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and a single tablespoon of Shaoxing wine to start, followed by a single teaspoon of hoisin sauce for our sugars, and a half teaspoon of white pepper to round this out. Finally, as promised, this is what ultimately ended up being a full 2 tablespoons of cornstarch that I'm adding before mixing to combine. We want so much cornstarch in our marinade here that it should essentially be coating the pork like a breading would, so that the cornstarch can go on to become a crispy coating to the pork later on. You may recognize this technique from pretty much every Mongolian beef that you've ever had. Moving on to our sauce element next. Now, as we have learned from our previous chow mein recipes, the greater majority of the depth of flavor in our chow mein is going to come from both the pork marinade as well as the noodle marinade, which means we can be relatively light-handed with the sauce element today. So, up first, this is 4 tablespoons or a 1/4 cup of soy sauce and a single tablespoon of Shaoxing wine to start, followed by a single tablespoon of brown sugar for some malted sweetness. Then next, this is what I would refer to as the holy trinity of dark and rich umami elements, which you'll see used in combination in a lot of Woo Can Cook recipes. This is a teaspoon each of oyster sauce, black vinegar, and dark soy sauce mixed together to combine. Over on the stove, I have a pot of water coming to a rolling boil, then I'm adding in my fresh lo mein and boiling these noodles for 2.5 minutes until tender. Unlike an Italian pasta, we don't really have much use for this starchy pasta water afterwards, so I'm neither salting nor reserving it for our noodles today. Relax, it's gonna be okay, y'all. Back over on the cutting board, I'm adding my now cooked noodles to a large mixing bowl so that we may toss it in what I would consider to be a relatively simple but extremely effective noodle marinade that you'll find in pretty much all Wukan cook chow mein recipes. This is a single tablespoon each of sesame oil and dark soy sauce tossed to combine. Back over on the stove, we're finally diving into our wok fry next, starting with a quick par fry to our noodles first. I have my wok heating up over medium heat, then I'm adding 4 tablespoons of peanut oil and, as always, long yao for that nice non-stick surface. Then next, here's my noodles going in for about 2 to 3 minutes until crispy, which we're tossing with a fair amount of aggression to make sure that they don't clump together. I'm doing this by using the edge of my spatula to sort of shake the noodles apart without also fracturing or cutting them too much. It is a delicate balance, so be patient and don't rush this step or else you'll end up with a lot of broken noodles. As a side note, for those keeping track, this step by definition is a requirement for any chow mein, chow meaning fry. If the noodles have not been fried in some fashion, then it would be a lo mein, lo meaning stir. Up next, moving on to our pork finally, I've removed my noodles, reheated the wok over medium heat once again, then added another 4 tablespoons of peanut oil and given one more long yao. I'm adding my pork evenly across the wok surface and letting this sear for about 2 minutes until the edges begin to crisp before tossing to combine. At this point, you'll notice our cornstarch coating is coming into play here, giving us this nicely even and crisped quality without overcooking or burning the pork. For those keeping track, this is the same way that we would go about making a Mongolian beef too. Moving on to our stir fry finally, I've removed my pork, reheated one more time over high heat, then added another 4 tablespoons of peanut oil and given one more long yao. Then going in here first are my aromatics. Here's my garlic and ginger going in for about 15 seconds until nice and fragrant, followed by our bok choy. I'm giving this a quick 1 to 2 minute toss until slightly tender and the leaves begin to just slightly wilt. Then I'm adding my pork back to the wok and tossing to combine. Last up, here's my noodles going in again. You'll notice I'm doing this a few handfuls at a time just so that we're not dumping too much oil back into the wok. Remember, this is a critical step when you're doing a lot of batch cooking like we are today. Finally, I'm seasoning this all with our sauce mixture to taste and we're ready to eat. Okay, so I realized that in the grand scheme of content creation, buying the completely wrong ingredient is generally a sign that we should probably just start the recipe over, which I did consider at various points while making this, but if I'm being completely honest though, this has kind of become one of my favorite chow meins that we've made on this channel, even if it was, well, completely by accident. I personally am not a huge fan of stir fries with 10 different veggies and proteins in it, and I actually think that this is kind of one of the main hallmarks that I've spotted in super Americanized Chinese cuisine. American Chinese food just loves to maximize on its stir fries. So, to this end, I love that this dish is essentially just 3 things: noodles, pork, and bok choy. It's simple, to the point, and uncluttered, and more importantly, it highlights just exactly how absolutely fantastic the sear is on this pork, y'all. We have a perfectly crisp and crunchy exterior quality coming from the cornstarch and wok sear, combined with the caramelized but not burnt sugars in our marinade, resulting in a pork chow mein that I honestly think outdoes pretty much any takeout chow mein that I have ever had. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. For those who are new to the channel, this one is part of a larger series that we've been doing that's dedicated to classic Chinese dishes, so definitely check out that series next if you haven't yet, because there's a lot of these. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, be nice YouTubers, and I'll see you soon.